The Trump administration is pushing the Supreme Court to let it block $4 billion in foreign aid already approved by Congress. A lower court called the move illegal. Trump calls it presidential authority. At stake is not just aid for peacekeeping and democracy abroad, but whether a president can sidestep Congress and rewrite the nation's spending laws. President Donald Trump's administration asked the US Supreme Court to intervene in its bid to withhold billions of dollars in foreign aid authorized by Congress, part of the Republican president's effort to scale back US assistance abroad. According to a report by Reuters, the Justice Department asked the court to halt Washington-based US District Judge Amir Ali's order, requiring administration officials to take steps to spend around $4 billion that they have sought to claw back. Notably, earlier on September 3rd, Ali had ruled that the administration cannot simply choose to withhold the money, and that it must comply with appropriations laws unless Congress changes them. The judge wrote that Congress would have to approve the rescission because the law was explicit that it is congressional action, not the president's transmission of a special message, that triggers rescission of the earlier appropriations. Ali couched his decision by saying that it would likely not be the final word in the case, and that definitive higher court guidance now will be instructive. The administration's emergency appeal was followed by a divided decision from an appeals court in Washington, D.C. last week that effectively required the State Department to spend $4 billion of that aid by the end of the month. US Solicitor General D. John Sauer told the Supreme Court on September 8th that unfreezing that aid poses a grave and urgent threat to the presidency, according to the appeal. The money at issue in the case was intended by Congress for foreign aid, United Nations peacekeeping operations, and democracy promotion efforts overseas. The Justice Department said in its filing that the administration views the $4 billion of disputed foreign aid funding as contrary to US foreign policy. Congress budgeted billions in foreign aid last year, about $11 billion of which must be spent or obligated ahead of a deadline of September 30, the last day of the US government's current fiscal year, lest it expire. After being sued by aid groups that expected to compete for the funding, the administration said last month that it intended to spend $6.5 billion of the disputed funds. Trump also sought to block $4 billion in the funding through an unusual step called a pocket rescission that bypasses Congress. Trump Budget Director Russell Vought has argued that the president can withhold funds for 45 days after requesting a rescission, which would run out the clock until the end of the fiscal year. The White House said the tactic was last used in 1977. Lauren Bateman, a lawyer for a group of plaintiffs, said on Monday the administration is asking the Supreme Court to defend the illegal tactic of a pocket rescission. Meanwhile, the US Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, in a 2-1 ruling on September 5th, declined to halt Ali's order, prompting the administration's request to the Supreme Court. The administration has repeatedly asked the justices this year to intervene to allow implementation of Trump policies impeded by lower courts. The Supreme Court, which has a 6-3 conservative majority, has sided with the administration in almost every case that it has been called upon to review since Trump returned to the presidency in January. Trump has claimed absolute authority over funding decisions in recent weeks, aiming to skirt congressional appropriations and judicial oversight. In his latest move, he pushed the justices to pause a lower court ruling that would release around $4 billion in US agency for international development contracts. Months after slashing the agency's funding, Trump officially shut down usaid in July. usaid programs saved more than 90 million lives over the past 2 decades, according to a July study published in The Lancet. Researchers estimated that if the Trump administration's funding cuts continue through 2030, 14 million people who might have otherwise lived could die. This is the third emergency appeal Trump has filed in the months-long back and forth over funding for the contractors. The High Court issued a split ruling in March when the case first came before the justices, refusing to block $12 billion in funding disbursement for USAID contractors. The administration was forced to pay nearly $2 billion in contractual work completed prior to a pause on foreign aid funds. Trump urged the justices to step in again last month to prevent the government from being forced to hand over billions more in contract funding before the fiscal year ends on September 30th. Trump quickly withdrew the appeal after a favourable ruling from the DC Circuit. Trump simultaneously pushed Republican lawmakers to cancel about $4.9 billion in previously approved foreign aid contracts through a move known as a pocket rescission. Under the Impoundment Control Act, the White House can place a 45-day hold on the budget line item it wants lawmakers to rescind. Trump sent a rescission notice to House Speaker Mike Johnson last week, demanding that Congress vote to cut the spending. However, the Trump administration issued its pause less than 45 days before the end of the fiscal year, a timing loophole that effectively allows the administration to cancel the foreign aid funding without congressional approval. Democrats on Capitol Hill characterized the move as plainly illegal, but Trump downplayed a potential pocket rescission as simply the consequence of the ICA's permitting the president to propose rescissions late in the fiscal year. The contractors returned to the lower court looking for another path to securing funds. The court held that the administration likely had to disburse all appropriated funds. The administration said it was committed to releasing $6.5 billion in funds, but the lower court issued an order last week compelling the disbursement anyway. Without the High Court's intervention, Trump warned that a single district court would be allowed to supplant Congress and the president's authority over appropriations.